In this lesson, we're going to take a step back from the code details and look at the architecture of REST-style web services. In particular, we're going to look at the two different approaches that we've taken so far in these lessons to writing such services. You're looking at one of my working files. This is called restarchitecture.txt, and at the top, I summarize in words the two different approaches that we've taken. I also have some very simple depictions of those two approaches, and the cursor is in front of the first. So let me cut to the quick. In this first approach, which uses HTTP servlets directly as web services, the service is simply a servlet instance that sits inside a servlet container. In the case of Tomcat, the container is called Catalina. In the case of Jetty, there's less confusion. The container and the web server are both called Jetty. In any case, the initial prediction service done with JSP and the later predictions to service done with the HTTP servlet subclass, both of those exemplify this first approach. There's lots of appeal to this approach. If you've done websites in Java, your websites basically are instantiated as servlet instances. In other words, in exactly the same way. So that experience with websites can be carried over directly to web services. There's also very little complexity. The web service instance sits inside the servlet container. There's no intermediate layer of software. The second approach we've seen in JAX-RS and RESTlet has a quite different architecture. In this case, you have, when you deploy with Tomcat or Jetty, you have the so-called interceptor servlet. We've seen that. And in the case of the Jersey implementation of JAX-RS, that interceptor servlet is very nicely named. It's called servlet container. You can see the cursor in front of the fully qualified name. What happens in this architecture is that a web service becomes, in effect, an application instance that sits inside the interceptor. The interceptor, in other words, acts as a container in its own right. What you now get is some complexity. So you have instances of the JAX-RS servlet container sitting inside the Tomcat servlet container. Now, with this additional complexity, of course, comes additional functionality. So in both JAX-RS and RESTlet, for example, we've seen that you get nice support for RESTful routing. You get, if you like, automatic generation of XML and even JSON documents. You get some easy data validation using regular expressions. So there's features that come with that extra software layer, but there's also complexity. Now, an obvious question, of course, in going over these architectures is to pick a favorite. And you may think that I'm chickening out here, but I'm not going to do that. It seems to me that one of the really attractive things about Java is that it gives us choices. That can be irritating when you're forced to make a pick. It can be a little bit annoying. It causes some head scratching, but it's better, I think, to be given those choices than to be forced to take a particular option. So if simplicity is what you want, then of course the HTTP servlet is the way to go. There's no intermediate layer of software. It's as close to the metal being the underlying web server's container. It's as close to the metal as you're going to get in doing REST-style web services. If the additional functionality is attractive to you, the RESTful routing, the use of annotations, the automatic generation of payloads and so forth, then JAX-RS, RESTlet, and even other frameworks become quite attractive. The most important thing, obviously, is to have a sense of the trade-offs. If I go this way, there are pluses and minuses. If I go that way, there are different pluses and minuses. As in everything in our business, it's always a question of trade-offs.